Greetings, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Brittany Champion, and I am the Vice Chair of RIMCO, a roundtable of the North Carolina Library Association. For those of you who aren't really sure what RIMCO stands for, we are the Roundtable for Ethnic Minority Concerns. I would like to welcome you to today's Cultural Conversation Series, People Not Property Opportunities for Involvement, featuring Dr. Claire Heckel. She is the coordinator of the project, and she is from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and she will provide more information on that project shortly. I would like to cover a few ways to make your webinar experience better. Please keep your mics and video turned off. If you're experiencing issues with sound, please try 3 of the following. Test your speakers by clicking the drop-down menu beside the speaker button. You can leave the webinar and return, and you can also try a different browser. If you're still experiencing issues, this webinar is being recorded and will be available before the end of the week. Throughout today's session, Dr. Heckel will pause and allow questions. Please enter them into the chat box as you think of them. And again, thank you for participating today. I would like to turn it over to Dr. Claire Heckel. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that introduction, Brittany, and thank you, Brittany and Marcellus, for organizing this webinar. I'm excited to share with all of you what we've been doing at the university libraries with People Not Property and related projects. I'll first talk a little bit about the Digital Library on American Slavery, which is the broader project that People Not Property is a part of, and then talk about People Not Property itself and opportunities for involvement. The PowerPoint slides that I'm sharing with you will be available as a PDF after the session. So if you feel like you're not getting a chance to note any information, you will have this to go back to later. The Digital Library on American Slavery is a project out of the university libraries at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. You can access it at library.uncg.edu/slavery. It's made up of 4 components at present: the Race and Slavery Petitions Project, the Runaway Slave Advertisements Project, the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, and the latest edition, People Not Property. The Race and Slavery Petitions Project is national in scope. It's a collection of legal documents, primarily court cases related to enslaved people, slaveholders, and free persons of color. It includes the names of 150,000 individuals extracted from 2,975 legislative documents and 14,500 county court petitions. These names include roughly 80,000 enslaved people, 8,000 free people of color, and 62,000 white people. Users can search by name, date range, state, keyword. They can browse by subject, and it includes a glossary of terms and help with searching feature. These court cases shed light on a lot of local histories related to slavery and free people of color and enslaved people. An example would be an 1831 petition from 87 residents of Lenoir County who are basically seeking to exclude colored retailers of cakes, spirits, etc. Their basic fear, coming just on the heels of the Nat Turner Rebellion, is that these free people of color, these tradespeople, are going to be spreading ideas and literature related to slave rebellion. So lower there you see that they might be distributing without suspicion pamphlets, as well as communicate verbally the murderous plans of a Nat Turner. Another case just showing the many ways in which enslaved people were rebelling or seeking freedom locally. 78 inhabitants of Sampson, Bladen, New Hanover, and Duplin County complain that our slaves are become almost uncontrollable. They go and come when they please, and if attempt is made to correct them, they fly into the woods and continue there for months and years. So a lot of these smaller rebellions are not documented in history books and can be researched and recovered through resources like these court petitions. Another case that stood out to me is a free woman of color, Madeline St. Risk in Edenton, who was able to purchase the freedom of her husband, which is a rather exceptional case. So browsing by subject, users can look under quite a range of topics related to slave ownership, transfer of enslaved people, as well as attaining freedom, the activities of free people of color, looking by county or state, and topics related to family, such as purchasing family members or pursuing the freedom of family members. The North Carolina Runaway Slave Ads Project runs from 1750 to 1865. Currently, it's run up to 1841, but it's ongoing. It includes images of all known runaway slave advertisements published in North Carolina newspapers, with contextualizing essays and an annotated bibliography to aid researchers. It also includes a searchable database. The ads are important because they include information such as the names of enslaved people and slaveholders. Also very valuable are the descriptions of freedom seekers. We very rarely in other sources get detailed descriptions of individual enslaved people, including their appearance, their clothing, as well as their personality traits. If they're literate, able to read and write, especially for forging passes to move around freely, as well as trades such as blacksmithing, coopering, carpentry, and other skills, including foreign languages, or mention of whether they might be recently arrived from Africa and where in Africa they might have come from, health, illness, and injury, as well as slaveholders' attitudes, common routes of escape and hiding places. So mapping out strategies for freedom seeking and strategies of escape. An example from Wilmington in 1773 describes 3 freedom seekers who ran away: Will, George, and Sylvia. Notable is Will, who is described as having his teeth filed and his country marks in his face. This is a reference to facial scarification and teeth filing, which can be seen in this much later photo from 1912 of 2 Congolese men with facial scarification and tooth filing, which were beauty conventions as well as tribal markers that were widespread in West Africa. In another runaway ad, an enslaved man named Jacob is described as having been heard by the overseer to throw out some hints that all should be free, and that he saw no reason why the sweat of his brow should be expended in supporting the extravagance and idleness of any man, or some words to that effect. The overseer describes that he wishes to impress these ideas upon the minds of the other Negroes, and I doubt not he will attempt to do the same wherever he goes. So here we have evidence of a kind of revolutionary resisting slavery and trying to spread what the slaveholders describe as dangerous principles among other enslaved people. The Transatlantic Slave Trade Database is a project out of Emory University. This project is complete at this point. It has quite a lot of resources for educators and researchers. This includes the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, but also the Intra-American Slave Trade Database. So this is actually quite relevant to the Carolinas and the Chesapeake region, because a lot of people who were imported enslaved were coming from Brazil, from the Caribbean, at these stopovers before arriving in the United States. There's also an African names database. This includes almost 100,000 names taken from slave ship registers. And it includes a number of interactive and still maps that give an overview of slaving voyages and their points of embarkment and disembarkment. Before I move into people not property, are there any questions about the other components of the digital library on American slavery?
It looks like there's no questions at this time.
Okay, so our latest addition to this set of resources is People Not Property, Slave Deeds of North Carolina. This is a 3-year initiative to identify, digitize, and transcribe property deeds that are related to enslaved people and to create a searchable database. It's funded by the National Archives, National Historical Publications and Records Commission. Slave deeds are basically any property deeds that include information about enslaved people. This information might be very general, such as just saying to enslaved people, or it might include names and ages and even family relationships, especially in the case of mother and children of the enslaved people. These projects have been going on locally in a more limited basis. The first was Buncombe County and Guilford County, where UNC Greensboro is located, has also completed an inventory of their slave deeds that are currently available online. The counties participating in this first leg of the project are 26. As you can see in the map, they range from Western North Carolina to the coast. And the project goals are to identify, download, and index a minimum of 9,800 deeds from the participating counties. As of the beginning of this year, we were close, well, a little over a quarter there, and we've continued to make progress since. We're also looking to build connections across the platforms in the digital library on American slavery. What you're seeing here is an example of a man and a woman named Jeffrey and Lydia. A man named Archibald Campbell posted a runaway ad for these two individuals, stating that Lydia and Jeffrey had fled. We generally do not know the outcome of these runaway ads. So an ad will be placed, and then we have no idea whether the people actually were successful in seeking freedom or unsuccessful. We see here Archibald Campbell makes a sale 2 years later to Christmas Murphy of a number of slaves. Listed among them are Jeffrey and Lydia. So we see here that unfortunately their attempted escape described in this ad was unsuccessful. Similarly, a man named Quacko was sold in January of 1809 from James Blount to John C. Baker in a deed transcribed in the image above. Later that year in September, a runaway ad is posted for Quacko. So we might be able to surmise that this sale may have been a motivation for Quacko to finally make an attempt at seeking freedom. People Not Property also has Twitter and Instagram accounts where we post daily deeds. So each date we post a deed from that date in the past, describing both, transcribing the names and ages of the individuals as well as the slaveholder and purchaser. And we adjust the amount for inflation to kind of show people what value economically was placed on human life under the system of slavery. We are also holding community information sessions. Of course, under current restrictions, those are on hold. But in the future, if any of you are interested in having a community information session at your institution, please reach out to me and we can work on that. We're currently halfway through our second year, so we've got another year and a half to hold these sessions and reach out to local communities. In the past, these community information sessions have included a team of student research fellows from UNC Greensboro and North Carolina A&T University. Dr. Arwen Smallwood, who's the chair of the Department of History and Political Science at A&T, has also joined us. His particular area of expertise is the history of Native American and African American communities in Eastern North Carolina. We've also taken students on field trips to Eastern North Carolina related to these community information sessions where Dr. Smallwood guided them through the history of the region. And we have student research fellows currently doing research related to the project, including creating an interactive story map that we hope to launch at the end of this month or in May. Are there any questions before I move on to ways to contribute to the project?
There are no questions at this time.
Okay. So there are basically three ways that volunteers can contribute to the project. One, the most basic, is to locate and label deeds. So this is reading through deed books page by page to identify deeds that mention enslaved people. This is the biggest challenge we face because these are handwritten documents. They are not searchable by keyword. So finding deeds that mention enslaved people that are mixed in amongst primarily land deeds, livestock deeds, is the most time-consuming part of the project. When you run across a slave deed, you give each one a unique document ID, and if possible, download it and label it with that document ID. Indexing is a bit more involved. This is transcribing all of the relevant information in the deed. Updating existing indexes. This is something we tend to assign to people who are either very fluent in data management or more experienced with the project. This is basically to go through indexes that were previously created by counties and reformat them and fill in missing data so that they can be imported with the rest of the indexes into our database. The first step is to register as a volunteer. Through a partnership with the Family Search organization, who has all of these deeds digitized already, we're able to facilitate volunteering that is entirely online. So in our volunteer resources page, there is the volunteer handbook, which provides an overview, detailed instructions, and some additional resources, including a guide to historic handwriting. And you'll see also here the link to registering as a volunteer. It's a short Google form. These are some examples of handwriting guides in the volunteer handbook. This is a transcribed deed, so people can compare the handwritten to the transcribed version, as well as a letter by letter guide to handwriting that we've created. All of these letters and words were pulled from actual deeds. So the data fields that we're collecting information on, instead of transcribing these deeds word for word because it's time consuming and they are kind of lengthy legal documents that can be very repetitive, we're pulling out specific information. This includes the type of deed, the date, amount, and currency if they're listed, as well as the grantor and grantee, the names of the enslaved people, and then additional details on enslaved people. So the number of individuals, their ages, family relationships, gender and race. Race we're listing as it's defined in the document. And there's a notes column for any information that seems interesting but doesn't fit in our defined fields. So I'm going to give an overview of the kinds of documents that we deal with. It looks like there might be a question popping up.
Yes, the question was, can the general public view these deeds?
Yes, I will shortly demonstrate what that looks like. Currently, the public can view the deeds for the counties that have completed their indexes. We are actually getting at this time permission from Family Search to host the images of the deeds on the UNCG website. So once the project is complete, it's a major priority of the project to have these available not behind a paywall. As many of you who work with genealogy know, that can be a big barrier. Things like Ancestry, where you can't access it without being a member. There will be no membership requirement. These will just be freely hosted on the library website. Were there any other questions?
Yes, we have another. Will you be offering an online orientation for new volunteers in the near future?
That's certainly something that we can look at. We would normally do it in person, but of course, with the current pandemic restrictions, I'm certainly available to do this similar orientation to what I'm doing now. If anyone who's currently attending wants to organize a webinar for their local communities or any kind of genealogy groups that might be interested, I would say just shoot me an email. My email is at the title of this slide, the title slide of the presentation. Anything else?
Yes. Is the project taking systematic advantage of published and indexed abstracts of deeds created in genealogical purposes to expedite the discovery of slave bills of sale?
We have looked at some of the indexes and abstracts that are available, but what we've found and what a lot of the local Register of Deeds offices who've completed the projects have told us is that they are quite often incomplete. There are a lot of deeds that haven't made it into those pages or that have been missed, so we're really trying to go back and do a page by page from the beginning search.
Okay, and that looks like that was all the questions that we have.
Okay. So here I'm going to go over the types of documents that are included in the project. The bill of sale is the most common. This is basically a receipt documenting the purchase of an enslaved person or persons. Deeds of gift are also included. So these don't include an amount generally, but it will say for the generally love, goodwill, and affection, giving and granting an enslaved person, usually to a family member. A deed of trust is a document basically establishing collateral on a loan. Here, enslaved people are basically put up as that collateral. If the terms of the loan are not satisfied, ownership would transfer. Last will and testament. Wills aren't systematically included in deed books, but they do show up, so we include them in the project. Partitions are perhaps the most complex deeds. This is the division of property between heirs. So if there's a dispute, a partition in kind, which is the example shown here, lists each of the heirs and which enslaved people were granted to each heir. A partition by sale, the enslaved people would have been auctioned and the proceeds divided between the heirs. Apprenticeship bonds are not technically slave deeds, but we are including them primarily because in most states under most of the 18th and 19th centuries, at least early 19th century, any children born without a father, recognized father, were considered orphans and were legally required to become apprentices. Also, under colonial law, children of mixed race were legally required to become apprentices. So this is a kind of forced labor. It's also a source of information about people of African ancestry. So this, for example, is Hugh Sparrow, described as a mulatto fellow aged about 33, the base son or illegitimate son of Mary Sparrow, and it documents that he completed the terms of his apprenticeship and is then a free man, free to practice his trade. I've seen a couple of questions pop up.
Yes, we have two. So the first one, have wills been reviewed?
There is no project I know of currently for North Carolina that has reviewed wills as a collection of documents. So we're including the ones that have been entered in deed books. But as far as I know, there isn't a current collection of wills.
Okay, and the second question, are there any protocols for quality control? Many people tend to misread the handwriting. I've seen many examples of misread deeds in the Guilford database.
We're currently looking at different options for crowdsourcing the transcription. Several of those allow for example for several different volunteers to transcribe the same deed, and then it compares and takes the most common transcription. So for example, if one person misread, then 2 or 3 other people would be able to correct that. Currently, we may also just have more senior members of the project, such as myself, our postdoctoral researcher, or the two principal investigators on the project to go through and just run a quality control once we have the images attached to the transcription.
Is there a way to submit personally owned documents?
We are currently handling those just as they come. The project itself is only dealing with deeds that are in Register of Deeds offices, but we are noting and creating files with personally held. We have had several people approach us with family archives, for example, and we are making an effort to archive those and include them.
Okay, that looks like that's all for now.
Okay. Marriage contracts are an additional type of document entered in deed books that do list property. This is often entered into in order to protect the property of the woman. Under 18th and 19th century law, women did not have individual property rights. And we see a lot of cases in the petitions, for example, of husbands basically squandering what their wife brought into a marriage, either gambling, drinking, ill-fated business ventures, and then leaving the wife and her children basically destitute. So marriage contracts are rare, but they do show up. This one, basically, Phoebe Blair and John Weddington are engaged to be married, and they are signing a contract saying that Phoebe's property will remain her property. This includes an enslaved man named Ned, and that this property will then transfer to her children, and her husband basically can't access it, spend it, use it, sell it. And the final, another legal action document is a writ of fieri facias. This is basically an officer of the court. In this case, it's a United States Marshal. Often they're also sheriffs who have basically been ordered by the court to seize someone's property and auction it in order to settle a legal dispute. In this case, it is a woman named Cassandra, enslaved woman named Cassandra, her children, Flora and Edmund, who are being, and Simon, who have been auctioned off and sold to a man named Benjamin Wood. And a following document tells us that 4 of Cassandra's other children were sold to another individual. So altogether, these documents kind of show us the many ways that the fates of enslaved people were tied to events in slaveholders' lives, and how unexpectedly families could be separated. The final type of document are emancipation documents. These are, of course, unfortunately rare, but this is a document showing that a man named Fortune bought his own freedom for the sum of $400 cash in Brunswick County. So I'm going to move on to how to access the deeds and what those look like in the Family Search format user interface. Are there any questions about deed types before I move forward?
It looks like there are no questions.
Okay. So volunteers are required to create a free account with Family Search. This just lets you log in and look at the documents. And I send out links to sets of deed books as volunteers sign up. You can look at the deeds, you know, kind of in this thumbnail view, or then zoom in. You can zoom in quite a lot further than I have zoomed in this image. And then you can also, with the tools button at the top right, adjust the brightness and contrast if the deeds are difficult to read. I just saw a question pop up.
Yes. How do you determine what type of document it is? Is it all context?
Yes, it is largely context. In the volunteer handbook, we have some guides, and that's what these examples are kind of doing. For example, it's highlighted here in the bill of sale in red, deed type bill of sale, that's circling the word sold. And these images in the handbook are accompanied by paragraphs that kind of explain how to recognize different types. So here, the third red rectangle is circling the phrase deed of gift. But also we explain, for example, if there's not money changing hands, if the words given and granted but not sold show up, that's a deed of gift. Deed of trust, in red here, it says stands lawfully indebted. So if a debt is mentioned, then it's a deed of trust. So there are more details in the volunteer handbook that describe to people how to determine what type of deed they're dealing with. And then also, once you've read several dozen deeds, you kind of get a sense for the structure and can kind of zoom in more quickly on what is being transferred in the deed, whether it's land, for example, or enslaved persons or other property. Okay, so we were at, for locating and labeling, volunteers are basically reading through the deed books page by page. We advise them to look for keywords like slave or Negro, or also a series of first names in the middle of a deed will indicate that it's a slave deed. The majority of deeds are land deeds. Those also become easily recognizable. As you see more and more of them, you start to notice how tracts of land are described. And generally, if it's a land deed, you can just skip ahead. When a slave deed is located, that's when we assign a document ID. So this is a screenshot of the spreadsheet that our volunteers are using. The county and county code will remain the same. And the county code is provided. And then you enter the book number or volume number. This is sometimes a number, sometimes a letter, as well as the page. So then the document ID is just county code dot book dot page and then dot 1, 2, 3, depending on how many deeds are on the page. Are there any questions about the document ID aspect? Okay. So some volunteers aren't able to download and upload, and in that case, they just create a list like this one from Wake County of the document IDs, and then our student employees go back and using that as a kind of table of contents, download the deeds. If volunteers are able to, we ask them to download each image and save it as a JPEG. And the image name is the document ID. And then they would upload these files to a Google Drive folder that's provided. I see a question.
Yes. Will you be submitting to present this information at the African American History and Genealogical Society's conference in the fall if things have gone back to normal?
Yes, we have a panel including our postdoctoral fellow, one of our steering committee members, Fred Watts, who's an active member of the AHGS, and one other individual whose name escapes me at the moment. We also sent 3 students from UNCG and North Carolina A&T and North Carolina Central who presented research at the last AHGS conference in DC, along with their faculty mentors. So we have had a regular presence at those meetings, and we plan to continue, of course, if it's held in the fall. So downloading the images, each image would be saved. For example, the first one here, Wake County Book 6, page 5, would be WAK.6.5.1.jpg. Indexing is a step beyond the locate and label, so it involves transcribing all of the data fields that were covered in the earlier examples. So document type, the date, the names of the grantor and grantee, the names of the enslaved people, number of enslaved people, their ages, family relationships, gender, etc. And finally, also these indexing fields in the volunteer handbook, there's a lot more detailed information about what each of these fields are and how they need to be entered when transcribing. So updating existing indexes, ultimately all of the data needs to be in the same format to be uploaded into the central database. This is an example from Iredell County. You can see that this spreadsheet looks slightly different from this spreadsheet. So we're working on getting all of that uniform. And those instructions will be developed on a case-by-case basis. But people who have more experience with spreadsheets, with databases, and making this data uniform are particularly good candidates for doing this work. Finally, something that I like to include this is in our volunteer handbook as well as all outreach events that we do, is addressing historical trauma. So this is the cumulative collective effect of physical and psychological violence that affects survivors of traumatic historical events such as slavery, genocide, and persecution. This is certainly relevant to the history of enslavement in the United States, and it can be something that comes up. Reading these documents can be very emotionally taxing. I've noticed that personally and also with our volunteers and student workers. Some of the symptoms of working with these painful histories can be sadness, hopelessness, fatigue or irritability, numbness, difficulty sleeping, nightmares, heightened sensitivity, or feeling jumpy or easily startled. We like people to be aware of these things just because that can be helpful if you notice any of it to know what's going on. I also like to reference people to Dr. Joy DeGruy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing. Dr. DeGruy also has a number of YouTube videos, other types of videos online where she talks about these things. Here's a screenshot of the cover of her book. We do like to recommend to volunteers, if they are feeling effects of historical trauma, to take breaks from the research work. This might mean walking away for a couple of hours, or it may mean putting it down for several weeks. Also talking to friends, family, religious or spiritual advisors, or other people who are doing this kind of work. Exercising and going for walks or meditation or prayer are other good options. That brings me to a close on this information, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments you might have at this point.
Okay. Well, it looks like I have one. Are there plans to expand this or other counties in NC?
Yes, we are. This first 3-year grant is just those 26 counties. We are currently talking about submitting new grant proposals. We would like to cover all 100 counties in the state. And if any local groups are interested in getting started in their own counties, we are absolutely happy to share our resources, our spreadsheets, to try and facilitate with Family Search to get those digital copies available.
Okay, let's see. I got a couple more coming in. Do you know what projects, researchers, etc., have used the deeds or the digital library? Is this project collaborating, communicating with other related projects? For example, National Park Service Network to Freedom?
We actually just became last month an official digital facility in the National Park Service Network to Freedom. So we're very happy about that. And in that way, we are connected with other organizations. Also attending events. Personally, I've been attending some of the events organized by the African American Heritage Commission, the North Carolina State Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So yes, we are actively working with other organizations. We've also had organizations in Mississippi, for example, or at Cornell contact us who are interested in launching similar projects in their own state. So we've been supporting other states in writing grants to get similar projects off the ground. Those are a couple examples. Then through attending conferences, of course, we're also working with people at other historic sites who are doing archival work.
Okay. It looks like this kind of piggybacks off the previous question. Is there a nationwide effort that will contribute to? I was a librarian and archivist in New Jersey, and there are many slave-related docs in my county.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that the institution of slavery was not limited to the southeastern United States. Certainly in the earlier colonial period, there were quite a few enslaved people in places like New York and New Jersey. I would point people interested in that northeastern area to Cornell. There's a project out of Cornell University. And we are linking to similar projects. We're currently redesigning our website, and we'll try to collect as many of those resources as possible to point people in the right direction to projects that are going on in other parts of the country.
How many volunteers are currently working? Are you able to share some high-level demographic information?
I was actually just looking at demographic information today for our report, our mid-year report that's due at the end of the month. We have 63 registered volunteers so far. Levels of activity vary widely. We have one volunteer, for example, who's retired and doing this daily, and he has done pretty much the entire county of Brunswick on his own. That's a pretty phenomenal, almost full-time investment. Then we have other people, of course, who can pick it up just a little bit here and there every few weeks. And demographically, a little over 50% of our volunteers are coming from North Carolina. They're pretty widely spread in terms of age, predominantly female. I would say 2/3 of the volunteers are female. And then we do have about 40% who are coming from out of state, which is was kind of surprising to us, but a lot of them do indicate that they had genealogical connections to the state of North Carolina. But in our volunteer registration form, we make it optional, but we do ask for age. We ask people to self-identify gender and race, and also to indicate whether or not they consider themselves a descendant of an enslaved person.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Please feel free to ask. Okay, well, this concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much, Dr. Heckel, for presenting more information on the project. I would like to thank you all for participating. This recording and PDF will be available before the end of the week. Please be on the lookout for additional webinars through our Cultural Conversation series on the NCLA conference and event calendar. If you're interested in joining NCLA or becoming a member of REMCO, please visit nclaonline.org for more information. Have a great day, you all, and please stay healthy. Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to thank everyone for attending as well, and please don't hesitate to email me directly if you have any other questions or comments, or if you'd like to organize an information session in your own area.